In this video, we will review the synchronization functions in the Mothernode QuickBooks Online integration, and towards the end of the video, we'll show you how to set it up in your Mothernode account. Let's begin by following the typical transaction flow in Mothernode. Early in the Mothernode transaction, meaning the Mothernode quote or the Mothernode order, sometimes a customer will need to take a deposit payment from the customer. Now that function has been around, it's been in Mothernode for years and years, the ability to accept a deposit payment into a quote or an order. But with the Mothernode QuickBooks Online integration, you have the ability not only to receive it in Mothernode, but also to synchronize it with QuickBooks so that QuickBooks can create a journal entry and associate it with the customer, and then basically hold it in place until the Mothernode invoice is created and subsequently synced over to QuickBooks as well. So in this first example, what I want to show you is that in a Mothernode order, and again, it could be a quote, it just depends on your internal process. If you do take deposit payments, you have the option of accepting it and logging it in the Mothernode quote. Or the Mothernode order, or it may be a hybrid. It may be a combination of the two, depending on your internal process. In this example, I've set up a deposit invoice, as you can see, in this Mothernode order, in the invoicing tab. In the quote, it's a similar tab. It's called deposit invoices. So in this case, I've set up a deposit invoice for $550. The payment can be received a number of ways. If you have the Stripe payment integration, it could be via customer ACH or credit card payment. It's more of an automated process. And then the details of the received deposit would appear here automatically. You can also receive a deposit manually by clicking the Receive button here, and it opens up a small window. And then you can enter the payment method and a reference number manually, click Save, click Yes to confirm, and the deposit is now received. So whether it was via Stripe, ACH, or credit card, or manually entered like this one, either way, the information will display here. And now we see a blue button that appears on the right side of the screen, which will allow you to initiate the sync process with QuickBooks Online. So just click Send Deposit to QBO, and then click Send here to confirm. It takes just a second or two. You can see just like that, it confirms that the deposit has been sent to QuickBooks, so I'll click OK. And now notice that the blue button on the right has become a green tag with the letters QB, and that basically confirms to us that everything went through well on the Mothernode side. Let's check it on the QuickBooks side and see what that looks like when a deposit has been synced. I'll go to my QuickBooks account, and then I'll highlight or hover over Create, and then select the journal entry function, and go to my journal entry history. And now I can see a list of journal entries, most recent at the top. So I'll select this one, 352-01. This is what the journal entry will look like. The 352-01 that appears here and here is significant because it matches the deposit number in Mothernode. So that's one way to visually link the two together to confirm that one is related to the other. And then the journal entry process, which was automated, it automatically did this in the background. The deposit payment amount is debited to undeposited funds, credited to customer deposit. The customer name appears here, so it is associated with the customer. If the customer previously did not exist in QuickBooks, then QuickBooks will create this customer in QuickBooks. It will do that automatically. And what I've done is fast forwarded the process. I've created the invoice from the order that we were just looking at that had the deposit payment. It's this one at the top of the list. And then when I open the invoice and click on the Record Payment tab, it has a record of the deposit. Now the deposit is an official payment on the invoice. You can see it's for the same amount. And then with the deposit note here below, just summarizing which deposit invoice it came from, the amount, and again, the green tag. Sometimes you may see a yellow tag here. If you do, that means that for some reason, it may have been intentional, it may have been inadvertent, but it means if it's yellow, that the deposit was never synced to QuickBooks. So it's a visual cue, if it's yellow, that you may need to go back to the original order, to that invoicing tab, and then sync the deposit so the journal entry can be created and you can move forward with the process. So it's not too late if you see here that the tag is yellow and that it hasn't yet synced over to QuickBooks. Just a note on that. Now, to sync the invoice, we still need to sync the new invoice over to QuickBooks. If you have a deposit payment, I mean, it's perfectly fine if you don't, but if you have a deposit payment here, then two things will happen. The invoice will be synced over to QuickBooks. QuickBooks will create the new QuickBooks version of the invoice, and then we'll use that journal entry reversal process to make this payment on the new invoice. So let's show you how that works. The way that you initiate the invoice sync is to go back to your invoices list, and then click the Actions drop down here in the upper right. Click on Sync with QuickBooks. The invoice at the top of this list, which is your invoices to export list, think of it as a queue of invoices that have not yet synced to QuickBooks. So anything in this list has not yet been synced to QuickBooks. The Export History tab is basically a summary of everything that has synced. The process is very straightforward. You simply select the invoices that you would like to sync. So yes, you can sync more than one at a time. We have customers that sync only one at a time, which is perfectly fine. We have others that will sync in bulk. It could be 5 invoices at a time, 10, 20, 30, 40, and so forth. So it's completely up to you based on the process that you will use. And if there is an applicable deposit, then you'll see that information below the invoice number. Like in this case, you can see the link representing the deposit number, the deposit amount, and the green tag, again, which indicates that the deposit was synced successfully previously. Again, if it shows up as a yellow tag, that's another cue to you that the deposit was never synced. And you can click on the link here. It will take you back to the related quote or order in which the deposit was received and give you the opportunity to sync it over to QuickBooks so that journal entry can be created. So even here, it's not too late to do that. So in this example, I choose only to sync this one at the top, the new invoice that we just created. I have it selected here. I'll click the Actions drop down on the right. I'll click Selected or Sync Selected. I'll click OK to confirm. And then when completed, I'll get the green confirmation at the top. And then I'll see under Export History, the row representing the sync. And if it's highlighted in yellow, that also indicates that the sync was successful. And you will also see additional visual information in the invoices list, as well as the invoice record itself. We now see along this row representing our new invoice, the date and timestamp representing when the invoice was synced along with the QuickBooks logo. And if I open the record, I'll see the QuickBooks logo in the upper left, and I will also see some sync log information at the bottom of the screen. Again, the date and timestamp along with the user that synced the invoice. And on the QuickBooks side of things, if I go back and find my journal entry function and go into journal entry history, I'll select this journal entry item at the top. The R after the journal entry number indicates a reversal. So this already tells me that I'm going to see a good result, that a reversal was created. We'll go ahead and open it up. It looks very similar to the original journal entry. It has the R at the end of the number, along with the date of the invoice sync, which is typically the date that the invoice was created. We see that now the deposit payment amount is debited to customer deposits and credited to your accounts receivable. Again, this is something that will be selected in your QuickBooks Online integration settings in Mothernode. And then the customer name remains the same, and in the description, it describes that this is a reversal of the original journal entry, which was 352-01 in this example. So this is the first of two things that will happen when you sync an invoice with a deposit payment over to QuickBooks. The journal entry reversal will be created, and the reversal, the product of the journal entry reversal, is that a payment credit will then be generated through this credit here and applied to the new invoice. And that's the second thing that will be happening during that sync, that the QuickBooks version of the invoice will be created, and then through this part of the process, the payment will be applied. And to confirm that, I'll find my related customer, I'll find the invoice that we just synced. It also notes the journal entry reversal and payment, which is good. And then I'll go ahead and open that entry. I can already see that the payment that started as a deposit payment in Mothernode is now applied to the new invoice in QuickBooks. I'll go ahead and open the full invoice so we can take a look at that. So it's the new invoice that has been synced and created in QuickBooks. And as I scroll down, I can see that not only is the invoice created, but the payment is applied through that journal entry and journal entry reversal process that we just reviewed. Now, one additional note on this is that it is a very reliable process, but once in a while, if QuickBooks has an issue with a procedural item, then it may not automatically apply that credit generated from the journal entry as a payment here. If it does not, then there's still a credit out there that you can manually apply. Just go to your receive payment function here and you'll see the outstanding credit. Once in a while, you may have to apply it manually. Generally, that does not happen, but if you don't see the payment, like in this case, we see the payment, but if you don't see the payment, then check receive payment and the credit should be there, again, as a result of the journal entry and journal entry reversal process. Now, once the invoice is synced between Mothernode and QuickBooks, there will be an active sync connection between the Mothernode invoice and the QuickBooks invoice. In most cases, there will be subsequent payments made on the invoice. We showed you how to process deposit payment, but when additional payments are made, there are a couple different ways you can handle that with the integration. So the first method, which is the recommended method because it begins in Mothernode and automatically syncs over to QuickBooks, is the ability to record the payment in Mothernode, and it will then, like I said, automatically sync over to QuickBooks. We can see here with our example invoice that we submitted a deposit payment of this amount. We still have a balance due of this amount. Let's say that the customer goes ahead and pays, and again, it could be through Stripe if you have that integration for payments for ACH and credit card, or it could be manually entered. We'll go ahead and open up the invoice, and again, we'll use the manual method as an example. We'll go ahead and click on record payment. Now we've received a payment. Let's say it's a check for the balance due, and I'll go ahead and click on new payment here on the right, and then it assumes the balance, but if it's a different amount, I can enter that, and then any additional notes as well as reference number. And I'll click on add payment. I'll click OK to confirm. And now the payment has been entered. This was the deposit payment. This is the latest payment. In Mothernode, it now shows that it's paid in full. It now shows a balance due of 0. Now, the nice thing about this process is that because there's an active connection on this invoice between Mothernode and QuickBooks, then the integration will see this payment automatically and immediately send it over to QuickBooks and apply it to the same invoice in QuickBooks. And if I go back to my customer record in QuickBooks for the same customer, I can see just from looking at the transaction list that an additional payment was made for that balance due. And if I just simply go into the invoice itself, and I can see it in the payment list, which is good. So that confirms it for me. But to view it on the invoice itself, I'll open up the invoice and I can see here the original deposit payment along with the balance due payment. So it does sync immediately once you have entered it into Mothernode. And we can see here in the invoices list in Mothernode also confirmation that the balance due, we saw it in the invoice record. Now in the invoices list, we can see that the invoice has been paid in full. There's no longer a balance due. The other payment scenario allows you to make the invoice payment in QuickBooks, again, as long as it's an actively synced invoice between Mothernode and QuickBooks. You make the payment in QuickBooks, and then it will sync back over to Mothernode and allow you to apply the payment. There are a couple of steps involved, which is why we recommend the process of adding the payment to the Mothernode invoice, because from there it just automatically syncs over to QuickBooks. But you do have an option of being able to add the payment to the QuickBooks invoice and then pull it into Mothernode and then apply it to the Mothernode invoice. So it is there as an option through this function called Get Payments below the Sync with QuickBooks option. So using a different example, since the original invoice has been paid in full, I have another invoice here that has been partially paid, and we can see below here as I scroll down that there was a deposit payment, but now I still have a balance due of $610. So let's go ahead and pay that and see what happens when we try to pull it and apply it in Mothernode. I'll go and click on Receive Payment and then finish recording the payment. I can see that the balance will be paid using this. I'll go ahead and record and close at the same time. So the balance has been paid in QuickBooks. We can see that here, and now the balance due in QuickBooks is 0. Now on the Mothernode side of things, I'll go back and go back to my invoices list. And now what I'm going to do is select Get Payments, and Get Payments will initially look for any new payments that were entered directly into QuickBooks over the past week. That's the initial search. If you need to change the search, if you need to go back a month, 2 months, what have you, or a specific date range, you can still do that. But by default, this function will do a search over the past week, which will work well for our example because I just added that payment in QuickBooks. We can see that the payment that we just entered for $610 is noted here. So it did find the payment that we just made in QuickBooks. It gives me the ability to make a selection here. If I click the checkbox here, it will basically tell Mothernode to pull that payment and apply it to the Mothernode version of the invoice to complete the cycle. I'll click the checkbox. I'll click on Record Payments in blue here. And that takes just a moment. And now we can immediately see the equivalent invoice in Mothernode, and we can see that it's paid in full based on this amount payment received and a 0 balance due. If I go ahead and open the invoice record just to be sure, I see balance due 0, I see paid in full, and when I click on Record Payment, I can see that the balance was indeed paid. So again, you have a couple of options for submitting a payment and then having it sync either from Mothernode to QuickBooks or QuickBooks to Mothernode. So we've seen how to process payments or sync payments between Mothernode and QuickBooks, whether it's a deposit payment or a standard invoice payment, and then of course syncing the invoice itself. Another sync option that you do have in the integration is the ability to sync POs. I'll just note this very quickly in that the process will be exactly the same as with the way that you sync invoices from Mothernode to QuickBooks. So you create a purchase order in Mothernode, you click the Actions drop-down, you click on Sync with QuickBooks. It takes you to a familiar screen where you have your export list of POs that have not yet been synced, and then of course you have your export history showing you what has synced. And then it's the same process from there. You sync your purchase order or purchase orders, and then click Actions on the right, and then Sync selected, and it will create the equivalent PO in QuickBooks. And just as is the case with invoices, as you scroll down the purchase orders list, you'll see the familiar stamp, so you'll always know which POs have been synced over to QuickBooks and which ones have not. Now let's take a look at the setup of the integration in Mothernode. And to do that, what you'll need to do is access your admin menu. So it does take admin level access in order to set this up. Under administration, click on settings, and then in your settings menu, scroll down and click on API connections. One of the options is QuickBooks Online. Click on that. Initially, it will show as grayed instead of green. And this is an example of the settings that have already been set up. But just to make this as realistic as possible, what I'm going to do is actually disconnect my settings so I can show you what it will look like initially. So your screen will look like this. And from here, it's just a matter of clicking the green Connect to QuickBooks button. And basically that will allow you to log in, sign in to your QuickBooks account. Now, if you're already signed in to your QuickBooks Online, as I am here, then it will be even easier because it will see the fact that you're signed into QuickBooks and use those credentials. So to show you what I mean, all I have to do is click on Connect with QuickBooks, and then it will see the connection and it will take me to this screen. The worst case is that if you're not logged in to QuickBooks, then you'll sign in to QuickBooks with your current credentials, just as you would with your QuickBooks Online account. So it's an easy process either way. And then you'll be taken to this screen where you confirm that you do want to make that connection between the Mothernode account and the QuickBooks account. Click Connect to confirm, and then QuickBooks will process it and take you to the settings screen where you can go through the various settings options. And then it's just a matter of working through the settings screens top down. Now, before you set anything, it is important to note the three options that you have here at the top of the screen. The two that are in green are functions that allow you to synchronize either your Mothernode customers with your QuickBooks customers, meaning that if there are additional customers that have been created in Mothernode that don't exist yet in QuickBooks, it's a way to sync everything up, line everything up, and create customers in QuickBooks that may not have been created as of yet. So you do have the ability to line up your Mothernode customers with your QuickBooks customers if you so choose. It's an optional function, and you can do the same with your vendors. The blue button is something we've already seen, the Get Payments function, which allowed us, as we showed you earlier, to go ahead and make a payment in QuickBooks and then pull that payment out of QuickBooks and apply it to the Mothernode invoice. It's a lot easier to do it from here, the invoices list, and go to actions and get payments than it is to go to settings and then go to API connections and then click this. It's just a few more steps, so it's a lot easier to do it from the invoices list. And then working top down in the settings, the first section, map division to QuickBooks class, this is only applicable to you if you have multiple offices in your organization and you've set those multiple offices up in Mothernode, and then also you've set those up in QuickBooks as classes. You have a way of matching them up. You don't have to use this, or if you're a single office location, not a problem. But in this example, I'll go ahead and map my Mothernode locations with my QuickBooks class locations. And then the next section allows me to set default QuickBooks GL accounts with income items, meaning sales items, and purchase items. The top three are sales related. The next two are purchase related. So this applies to your line items in the Mothernode sales transaction, meaning the invoice, or the Mothernode purchase transaction, which is purchase orders. If a line item in the Mothernode invoice already exists in QuickBooks, because QuickBooks will look at that, QuickBooks needs to know the line item information as well as the customer information and payment information coming from Mothernode. So with the line item information, QuickBooks will check to see if that line item coming from Mothernode already exists in QuickBooks. If so, then there's a match. If not, then QuickBooks will automatically create that item name in QuickBooks, and it needs to know what GL account to use. So what we do is we allow you to set what the default GL account will be for things like freeform items in Mothernode, service items, inventory items, and so forth. The same with purchase items. If it's an expense account or a purchase item account, QuickBooks requires that some type of GL account in QuickBooks be specified. If it does, have to create a new item in the product list and the inventory list in QuickBooks. So for example, in one of our sample invoices, and looking at the line items, one of the fields, of course, is product or service, the line item name. QuickBooks, as it creates the invoice, will try to match this, this, and this with the inventory list in QuickBooks. If it exists, great, it matches up, no problem. If it doesn't exist in QuickBooks, then QuickBooks will create the item. It just needs to know which GL account to use, at least as a default. So that's why you have these default settings. When you click the drop down for each of these, then these are the GL accounts that are coming directly from QuickBooks. So QuickBooks requires that a default be selected so that any new items coming over to QuickBooks can be created. It can always be updated if you needed to change the GL account in QuickBooks once it's been created in QuickBooks, then that's not an issue. QuickBooks just needs to know initially what GL account to use depending on the item type. So what I'll do here for this example is I'll select sales of product income as my default account here, and I can choose to just refer back to this default by leaving it at use default for service items and inventory items, or I could choose a different account. Same with my two purchase accounts. I can choose cost of goods sold here for this one, and then refer to this one for the second one by just leaving it at use default expense account. This drop down is just for when new tax rates, let's say there's a new tax rate that is specified in the Mothernode transaction and it sends over to QuickBooks, and it's the first time that QuickBooks is seeing that new tax rate, then QuickBooks just needs to know what the default tax agency will be. Now, QuickBooks has an automated sales tax calculation process, which is very, very good. It's automated. So this is really more of a formality. It's not going to be used or referenced a whole lot, but QuickBooks still requires that something be selected. So since I'm in the state of Texas, I'm just going to use this as a default and rest easy because it shouldn't cause any issues moving forward. Now, this next section is what impacts the journal entry process that we showed you earlier in the video. So the thing to do is to click this toggle so it turns blue, and it turns the journal entry process on. If for some reason you do not wish to use the journal entry process for your deposit payments, you don't have to. You would just turn this off. If you choose to use it and do the things that we mentioned as far as processing journal entries and journal entry reversals for your deposit payments, then turn it on and then select your accounts receivable account in QuickBooks, your customer deposit account, whatever that's named, and your undeposited funds account. So the setup for that function is very, very easy. And the final three options here are just that. They're optional. The first one, non-inventory item mapping. So this impacts the line item name in Mothernode. You can map it as is, as the same exact name in Mothernode over to QuickBooks, and that will be the product name or item name in QuickBooks. So it could be a one-for-one mapping, or if you would like to map the Mothernode item to a special name or category or non-inventory name in QuickBooks, then you can do that. You set up the non-inventory name, or it could be a service name in QuickBooks. And if you want the Mothernode item to map to that specific QuickBooks non-inventory name, service name, then you can do that. The way that you do that is turn the function on, first of all, by changing this to blue, and then this option here is clickable, and it's going to open a window with all of my non-inventory items and service items coming from QuickBooks. So if I have a long list of non-inventory and service items, then I don't want all of those to appear, because it's going to end up being a drop-down in your line item entry in Mothernode. So you would not want to see all of this. But if you have special non-inventory items or service items that you wish to map to, so you can better categorize the items in QuickBooks, then you can do that. So you basically select the items that you wish to map to in QuickBooks. You don't have to click save or anything. You just make your selections and close the window. And where you will see this in action in Mothernode is typically in a Mothernode quote or an order. I'm in an open quote. I'll go to my quote entry. So when you're adding or editing line items in Mothernode, you'll see a reference to what I was just showing you in the setup. I'll go ahead and click edit on an item. This is a BOM freeform item, and I see this QuickBooks non-inventory field here. That's impacted by the window that I just showed you a moment ago, where you basically select a number of your QuickBooks non-inventory items. So these are the items coming from your QuickBooks, and you make a selection, and then that's where it will map to in QuickBooks. The name of it will still remain the same in Mothernode on the Mothernode transactions, the quote, the order, the invoice, and you will see this option in all line item types. Even if I were to click add item and freeform, I'll see the same type of field here. So all line item entry will allow you to select a mapping mechanism if you so choose. It's optional. And then going back to our settings, as far as the last two options are concerned, you can also map on a line item basis to QuickBooks classes. So if you want to track individual line items or line item names that are in your QuickBooks inventory list, and you want to assign a class to each one of those line items, you can do that. You can do line item class mapping. The line item class mapping dropdown will work the same way as this dropdown. You'll see this as a drop-down option in your line items. Just as we saw with this one, you would select a class, and that will be mapped over to QuickBooks as well, and you could use it for reporting purposes. So there's not a lot of setup you have to do here other than turning it on. And the final option is merge sub-items. The way that the sync will work with respect to line items, as we showed you, and I'll use my test invoice as an example. When the line items sync over with the Mothernode invoice, it's line for line. Even if it is a parent item followed by sub-items, you could have a parent line item number 1, and then sub-item 1.1, 1.2, 1.3. They will all go over to QuickBooks by default as separate line items. So that's always the default. You don't have to worry about that. But if for some reason you only want the parent item to be synced from Mothernode to QuickBooks, only the parent item, you don't want any of the sub items to sync over to QuickBooks, you just want them to roll into the parent item, and only the parent item should sync over to QuickBooks. If that's the desire, it won't affect anything in Mothernode, but the way that you handle that is to turn this on. We don't have a lot of customers that use it. Typically, they want to see all the line items coming over from Mothernode to QuickBooks, but if for whatever reason you only want the parent line item to come over to QuickBooks, then you would turn this on. And otherwise, as for settings, there's just a reference to the tax codes that are currently in QuickBooks. So there's nothing that you have to do or change here. It's strictly a reference. You can see there's nothing else below. No save button. As you make changes here and you make updates, then it auto saves. So that's basically it for the setup. Once you do the setup here, then everything I showed you early in the video as far as the sync functions will take place, will kick in, and you'll be set to go. So that's it for the sync processes with the integration and the setup. If you have additional questions, please contact us at customer.support@mothernode.com.